The afternoon sun beat down on the boardwalks of Echo Valley, Montana territory, with a ferocity that turned the air into a shimmering curtain of heat. It was 1874, and Elara Vance stood on the porch of the Mercantile, her knuckles white as she gripped the handle of a carpetbag that contained the sum total of her life. At 25, Elara felt less like a woman and more like a discarded object. The town, with its false front buildings and dusty thoroughfare, seemed to be holding its breath, watching her. She could feel the eyes of the townspeople, the shopkeepers, the matrons, the idlers, boring into her back. They were eyes filled not with pity, but with a smug sort of satisfaction. "Best step inside the shade, Elara," her sister-in-law Beatrice said. Her voice was thin, strained, the way one speaks to an invalid or a simpleton. "The freight wagon won't be here for another 20 minutes. Elara didn't move. She was afraid that if she sat down, she might never stand up again. The shame she carried was heavier than the trunk waiting by the roadside. 3 years of marriage to Robert Vance had produced nothing but silence in the nursery and a growing resentment that had only ended when Robert's heart gave out during the spring thaw. A widow was a tragedy. A barren widow was a burden. Her brother, Elias, stepped out of the store, wiping sweat from his forehead with a stained handkerchief. He looked at Elara, then quickly at the ground, unable to meet her gaze. "It's a good situation, Elara," Elias muttered, reciting the lines he had convinced himself were true. "Silas Thorne has a good spread, 300 acres near the foothills. Since his wife passed, the place has gone to seed. He needs a housekeeper. You need a place." "A place," Elara repeated, her voice dry as the dust swirling around her skirts. "It was the Reverend's idea," Beatrice chimed in, smoothing her apron over her own swollen belly, a cruel reminder of everything Elara wasn't. Mr. Thorne agreed to the arrangement. The arrangement. It was a polite word for exile. Elara knew who Silas Thorne was. Everyone did. He was the ghost of the foothills, a man who had lost his wife and young daughter to smallpox 4 years ago and had subsequently declared war on God and society. He came to town twice a year, spoke to no one, and drank enough whiskey to kill a mule. Sending the town's barren woman to live with the dead man was Echo Valley's idea of a cosmic joke. 2 broken things, sent out to the middle of nowhere to rot together. The rumble of wheels announced the arrival of old Jeb's freight wagon. The horses looked tired, their heads low, mirroring Elara's spirit. As Jeb climbed down to load her trunk, Elara looked at the town one last time. She saw Mrs. Gable and Mrs. Miller whispering behind their hands across the street. She saw the pity in the blacksmith's eyes. "You take care now, Elara," Elias said, patting her shoulder awkwardly. He was relieved. She could smell the relief on him like stale tobacco. "Goodbye, Elias," Elara said softly. She climbed onto the hard wooden bench of the wagon, keeping her spine rigid. She would not give them the satisfaction of tears. Not here, not now. As the wagon lurched forward, leaving the safety of the town for the vast, terrifying open range, Elara Vance decided she would survive. She had survived the silence of her womb. She would survive the silence of Silas Thorne. The journey took 4 hours. The landscape shifted from the flat, sagebrush plains to rolling hills that rose like the backs of sleeping giants. The air grew cooler, scented with pine and impending rain. "Storm's brewing," old Jeb grunted, pointing a gnarled finger toward the west, where bruised purple clouds were stacking up against the mountains. "Let it come," Elara thought. They turned off the main road onto a rutted track that looked as if it hadn't seen a wagon wheel in months. Weeds grew high in the center, brushing against the underside of the wagon. Finally, the homestead came into view. It was a skeleton of a ranch. The main house, built of sturdy timber, looked gray and defeated. Shutters hung askew. The porch listed dangerously to the left. The barn door was propped open with a broken plow. It was a place where hope had packed its bags and left long ago. Jeb pulled the horses to a halt. "I ain't unloading the trunk. My back's acting up. You tell Thorne to come get it." "Thank you, Jeb," Elara said, climbing down. Her boots sank into the untended yard. Jeb tipped his hat, turned the team around, and left as fast as the tired horses would allow. He didn't want to be near the gloom that hung over the Thorne place. Elara stood alone with her carpetbag. The silence was absolute, broken only by the wind sighing through the uncut grass. She walked to the porch, stepping carefully over a rotted plank, and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder. The door was yanked open with such force that Elara took a step back. Silas Thorne filled the doorway. He was a mountain of a man, lean and hard, with a beard that hid half his face and hair that hung to his shoulders in the tangled waves. But it was his eyes that arrested her, dark, hollow, and utterly cold. "You're early," he rasped. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together. "The wagon made good time," Elara replied, refusing to look away. "I'm Elara Vance." He looked her up and down, not with desire, but with an appraisal one might give a horse at an auction. "You're small. This is hard work. I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Thorne." "We'll see." He stepped back, leaving the door open. "Trunk?" "At the gate." Jeb couldn't lift it. Silas let out a sharp breath of annoyance, pushed past her, and strode toward the gate. Elara stepped inside. The interior was a testament to neglect. Dust lay thick on every surface. Dirty dishes were stacked in a precarious tower on the table. The fireplace was cold, filled with ash, from weeks ago. The air smelled of stale coffee, wood smoke, and loneliness. Elara set her bag down. She didn't cry. She felt a strange, cold anger igniting in her chest. This man had given up. He was wallowing in his filth, and she was expected to clean it up. "Well," she thought, taking off her bonnet, "if this is my prison, I will at least make it clean." When Silas returned with the trunk, hoisting it onto his shoulder as if it were filled with feathers, he found Elara already sweeping the kitchen floor with a broom she'd found in the corner. "Your room is the back one," he said, dropping the trunk in the hallway. "Stay out of the main bedroom. Stay out of the study." "I understand," Elara said. "I'll need wood for the stove if you want supper." "I eat cold beans," he muttered. "I don't," she countered. Silas paused, looking at her with a flicker of surprise. He wasn't used to pushback. He grunted, turned on his heel, and went back outside. 10 minutes later, the sound of an axe splitting wood echoed through the valley. The first 3 months were a battle of wills fought in silence. Elara worked from dawn until dusk. She scrubbed the floors until the wood grain emerged from the gray grime. She beat the rugs until the dust of 4 years was gone. She coaxed the chickens back into the coop and found the hidden nests in the tall grass. Silas worked the cattle. He left before the sun was up and returned after dark, smelling of horse sweat and exhaustion. He ate the meals Elara prepared, stews, fresh bread, roasted vegetables from the garden she had resurrected, with a ravenous hunger, but he rarely spoke. More coffee might be the extent of his conversation for 3 days. But Elara noticed the changes. She noticed that the porch step was fixed one morning. She noticed that he wiped his boots before coming in, a courtesy he hadn't extended the first week. She noticed him watching her sometimes when she was churning butter or mending clothes, a puzzled expression on his face, as if he were trying to solve a riddle. Winter came early to Montana that year. In November, the temperature plummeted and the sky turned a steel gray. One evening, a blizzard struck with terrifying speed. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the window panes. Elara was knitting by the fire when the door burst open. Silas stumbled in, carrying a shivering calf in his arms. He was covered in ice, his face pale. "Get blankets," he shouted, his voice cracking. "There are more out there. The herd is drifting toward the ravine." Elara didn't hesitate. She grabbed the quilts from her bed and threw them over the calf near the stove. Then she grabbed her heavy coat. "What are you doing?" Silas demanded, grabbing her arm. "You can't turn them alone, Silas. Not in this wind. You'll freeze." "I'm tougher than I look," she repeated her words from the first day. He looked at her, really looked at her, and nodded. "Stay close to me. If you get lost in the whiteout, you're dead." They fought the storm for 4 hours. It was brutal, back-breaking work, shouting over the wind, pushing panicked beasts away from the drop-off, driving them toward the shelter of the barn. Elara's hands went numb, her eyelashes froze together, but she didn't stop. She rode the mare, Bessie, with a skill that surprised Silas, cutting off stragglers and forcing them back to the herd. When the last cow was secured in the lower pasture, they stumbled back into the house, exhausted beyond measure. Elara couldn't stop shaking. Her teeth chattered violently. Silas built up the fire until it roared, then pulled the mattress from his bed into the main room. "It's too cold in the back," he said gruffly. "Sleep here by the fire." He took the opposite side of the hearth. For an hour the only sound was the crackle of wood and the wind outside. You ride well, Silas said into the darkness. My father? He raised horses, Elara stammered, the warmth finally seeping back into her bones. You saved the herd, Elara. It was the first time he had used her name since the day she arrived. We saved them, she corrected. Silence stretched again, but it wasn't the heavy, hostile silence of before. It was companionable. My wife, Silas began, his voice low. Sarah, she loved this weather, said it scrubbed the world clean. Elara held her breath. We lost a little girl. Emily. She was 3. I know, Elara whispered. I'm so sorry, Silas. People in town, they think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. You're not crazy, Elara said firmly. You're just hurting, and hurt has to go somewhere. And you? He asked. Why did they send you here? A woman like you? Because I'm broken, Elara said, the truth spilling out in the dark. I can't give a man children. In Echo Valley, a barren woman is just a mouth to feed. Silas sat up. The firelight cast shadows across his scarred face. That's a damn fool way to measure a person's worth, he said. You've got more grit in your little finger than half those men in town have in their whole bodies. Elara felt a warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Spring brought a thaw, and with it, a stranger. Elara was hanging laundry when she saw the wagon lurching up the track. It wasn't old Jeb. It was a small, rickety cart driven by a woman who looked as if she were made of paper. Elara ran to the gate as the horse stopped. The woman slumped over the reins. She was young, barely 20, and her skin was the color of old parchment. In the back of the cart, wrapped in a bundle of rags, a baby cried. A thin, mewling sound. Help, the woman whispered. Silas came running from the barn. He carried the woman inside, laying her on the bed in the back room. Elara took the baby. The woman's name was Lily Harper. She was dying of consumption. Anyone could hear it in the rattle of her chest. She had come from the mining camps in Colorado, trying to reach a cousin in Oregon, but her strength had failed her. The boy, Lily, gasped, gripping Elara's hand with fever-hot fingers. His name is Noah. Please, don't let him go to the orphanage. I've seen those places. They kill the spirit. Elara looked down at the infant in her arms. He was tiny, malnourished, with eyes that seemed too big for his face. Her heart, which she had fortified behind walls of stone, cracked wide open. We'll take care of him, Elara promised. Silas? Lily looked at the looming figure in the doorway. Silas looked at the baby, then at Elara's face. He saw the desperate longing there. He remembered his own empty nursery. We'll take care of him, Silas echoed. Lily died 2 days later. They buried her on the hill overlooking the valley, planting wildflowers on the grave. Life on the ranch changed instantly. The silence was replaced by the sounds of a baby. Elara, who had been told she would never be a mother, found that her instincts were sharp and true. She fed Noah goat's milk, sang him lullabies, and walked the floor with him when he had colic. And Silas was transformed. The man who had lost a daughter found himself captivated by this son who wasn't his. Elara would find him in the evenings, holding Noah in his massive, calloused hands, whispering stories about the stars and the cattle. He needs a father, Elara said one evening as they sat on the porch. He has one, Silas replied, not looking up from the toy horse he was whittling. I mean, legally, Silas. If we want to keep him, we have to do it right. Silas stopped whittling. He looked at Elara. The seasons had changed them both. Elara was tan from the sun, her arms strong, her eyes bright. Silas had trimmed his beard and washed the gray from his soul. Then we go to town, he said. We make it legal. They underestimated the cruelty of the past. 3 weeks after they filed the adoption papers with Judge Holloway, a carriage arrived at the ranch. It was sleek, black, and expensive. A man stepped out, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than the ranch's yearly earnings. He introduced himself as Reginald Sterling. He was handsome in a slick, predatory way. I am looking for my son, Sterling said, dusting a speck of lint from his lapel. I was informed by a mutual acquaintance that Ms. Harper passed away here. Elara held Noah tighter against her chest. Silas stepped between the man and Elara. Lily said the father was dead, Silas growled. Lily was a dramatic woman, Sterling smiled, a cold twisting of lips. We had a disagreement. She ran, but the boy is my heir. My legitimate children are all daughters. I need a son to inherit my estate in St. Louis. You don't want a son, Elara said, her voice trembling with rage. You want an asset. Semantics, my dear, Sterling dismissed her. I have the law on my side. I am the biological father. You are the housekeeper and the hermit. No court will grant you custody over a man of my standing. He looked around the ranch with a sneer. I'm willing to offer you a reward for your trouble. $500. Hand over the boy, and you can buy some new cattle. Get off my land, Silas said. His voice was low, vibrating with a violence that made Sterling take a step back. I'll be back with the sheriff, Sterling warned, climbing into his carriage. And I'll take the boy. That night, fear descended on the ranch house. Not the fear of storms or hunger, but the fear of losing the light they had just found. He has money, Silas, Elara wept, pacing the floor. He has lawyers. He doesn't have us, Silas said. He went to the closet and pulled out his good coat, the one he hadn't worn since Sarah's funeral. We're going to fight. The courtroom in Echo Valley was packed. The story of the hermit, the barren woman, and the orphan had spread like wildfire. Sterling sat at the plaintiff's table, looking bored and confident. Silas and Elara sat on the other side. They looked like what they were, hard-working people of the earth. Sterling's lawyer painted a picture of Silas as an unstable recluse, and Elara as a desperate barren woman trying to steal another woman's child to fill her own void. It was cruel, and it was effective. The judge looked sympathetic to Sterling's arguments about financial stability and proper upbringing. Then it was Silas's turn to speak. He stood up, uncomfortable in his suit, but he stood tall. Your Honor, Silas began, Mr. Sterling talks about assets. He talks about heirs. He hasn't once asked what Noah likes to eat. He hasn't asked how to get him to sleep when he's fussy. Silas looked at the townspeople. You all know me. You know I fell into a hole when my family died. I was a ghost. But this woman, he pointed to Elara, she pulled me out, and this boy, he put the sun back in the sky. Being a father isn't about blood, Silas continued, his voice ringing through the hall. It's about showing up. It's about love. Mr. Sterling wants an heir. We want a son. The courtroom was silent. Then a voice spoke up from the back. It was Mrs. Gable, the town gossip who had mocked Elara the most. I saw Sterling in the saloon last night. She stood up, clutching her purse. He was bragging that as soon as he got the boy, he was going to hire a nursemaid and send him to a boarding school in the East so he wouldn't have to deal with the squalling brat. Objection, Sterling's lawyer shouted. It's true, old Jeb shouted from the other side. I heard him too. Suddenly the tide turned. The town of Echo Valley, which had scorned Elara and Silas, realized that these two outcasts were the only ones actually fighting for the child. They saw the love in the way Elara held the baby. They saw the protective stance of Silas. The judge banged his gavel. Mr. Sterling, is this true? You intend to send the child away? It is standard for children of my class, Sterling sniffed. Not in my jurisdiction, the judge scowled. Custody is granted to Silas Thorne and Elara Vance, pending, of course, a stable home environment. You two aren't married, which presents a legal difficulty. Silas turned to Elara. He didn't ask. He didn't hesitate. He took her hands in front of the whole town. Elara, he said, we've been living life backward. We built the home, we raised the child, we fought the battles. Maybe it's time we start the beginning. Is that a proposal, Mr. Thorne? Elara smiled, tears streaming down her face. It is, Mrs. Vance. Then I accept. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Even Beatrice was dabbing her eyes. Chapter 7. The Harvest. They were married 3 days later in the small church at the end of Main Street. It wasn't a sham marriage or a business arrangement. It was a union forged in fire and storm. Reginald Sterling left town in a cloud of dust, threatening appeals that never materialized. It turned out he had debts back east and couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle. Years passed. The Thorne Ranch flourished. The herd doubled. The house was painted a bright, welcoming white, and the garden was the envy of the county. Noah grew tall and strong, learning to ride before he could read. He was joined 2 years later by a miracle, a daughter born to Elara, The woman everyone said was barren. The doctors couldn't explain it. Silas just said it was because the house was finally warm enough for life to grow. One autumn evening, Elara stood on the porch, watching the sun set over the golden wheat fields. Silas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Noah was chasing the dog in the yard, and little Sarah was sleeping in the cradle. "Thinking about the day you arrived?" Silas asked, resting his chin on her head. "I'm thinking about the joke," Elara said softly. "What joke?" "The town. They sent me here as a joke. The barren woman and the dead man. They thought it was funny." Silas chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that vibrated against her back. "Well," he said, kissing her cheek, "I guess we're the ones laughing now." They watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting long shadows that were no longer scary, but protective. They were a family of broken pieces that had fit together to make something unbreakable. I hope you enjoyed this reimagining of Elara and Silas's journey. It's a reminder that sometimes our greatest chapters begin when we think the book is over. Here is what I'd love for you to do next. Share your story. Have you ever experienced a second act in your life where things turned around unexpectedly? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe. If you love historical romance and stories of redemption, hit the subscribe button so you never miss a new story. Spread the hope. Share this story with someone who might be going through a tough winter of their own. You never know who needs to be reminded that spring is coming. Thank you for reading.